The gravel under the cab's tires crunched like bones. I hadn't heard that sound in over 2 weeks, but it used to greet me every time I came home from the market. Familiar grounding. The driver looked in the mirror. Want me to wait? I shook my head. No, thank you. I stepped out slowly, my bag in one hand, my left side still tender from the stent procedure. It had been a minor thing, just a blockage. In and out. They'd said I'd be home by the weekend. But complications kept me under monitoring. 15 days total. Long enough, it seemed, for my life to be repainted. I paused at the walkway. There was a new car in the driveway. Pale silver with a dented fender. Not Bram's. And definitely not mine. The curtains in the living room window had changed too, something gauzy and beige. Mine were blue. Heavy. I'd hemmed them myself to block the late sun from fading the couch. A tightness gripped my chest that had nothing to do with surgery. I walked up the steps slower than usual. The porch light was off. No welcome mat. The wind had knocked over one of my potted plants. The terracotta lay in 2 pieces. Before I could lift my hand to knock, the door swung open. Esmara. She was wearing one of my old cardigans. The green one with the pearl buttons. Her nails were done, her expression casual, like I'd just returned from a grocery run, not a hospital bed. Oh, she said, blinking. You're back. I said, keeping my voice even. Where's Bram? She shrugged. Out. A beat of silence. Then she leaned her weight on the doorframe and said lightly, Listen, my parents live here now. We moved them in last week. I blinked. You what, they're staying? It made sense. They needed the space, and with you gone, everything was just sitting here. We figured you'd recover better somewhere quiet. Less complicated. I didn't answer. I stepped forward, trying to look past her into the hallway. I saw boxes. My boxes. Marked with black marker, kitchen linens, office. They were stacked by the back door like deliveries. I need to lie down, I said. I'm still under medication. I need my... There's a motel on 5th. It's not fancy, but it's clean. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Or maybe Bram mentioned Arizona somewhere drier. I kept my face still. You didn't think I might come back. Her lips curved, but not into a smile. Honestly, we thought you'd stay longer. Or that Bram would handle it. My throat felt dry. The cardigan she wore still smelled like my lavender sachets. I looked her in the eye. Enjoy it while you can. She blinked. Then I turned, walked down the steps, and didn't look back. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket, but I didn't answer. Not yet. By the time I reached the curb, the tightness in my chest had shifted. Not pain, just pressure. A question forming not in words, but in quiet resolve. I flagged down a second cab. Where to? The driver asked. I opened my bag, pulled out an envelope I hadn't thought I'd need again, and said, the Motor Lodge by Hollow Creek, and make it quick. The motel room was clean, if a little sour-smelling. 1 window, 1 chair, and a twin bed that creaked every time I breathed. I lowered myself down slowly, waiting for the pain in my side to settle. The TV remote was sticky. The curtains barely met in the middle, and the heating unit rattled like it had something loose inside. Still better than being in my own house, apparently. I laid back and stared at the water stain in the ceiling, letting the hum of traffic outside fill the silence. My body felt heavier than the day I went into the hospital, not because of the stent. That was healing fine. What hadn't healed was whatever part of me believed Bram wouldn't let this happen. I don't cry easily, but something pressed behind my eyes that night. Something old and unspoken. I closed my eyes and let it take me backward. It wasn't always like this. I bought that house with money scraped from 2 jobs, one as a bookkeeper for a mechanic's garage, and one as a part-time clerk at the county archive. I was 39, widowed, and Bram was 5. Too young to understand why Daddy never came home from the mill that day. Too young to know that funeral flowers don't pay for groceries. I remember standing outside that little brick house the first day I got the keys. My name on the deed, My name, no one else's. The porch needed work, and the inside smelled like damp wallpaper and old smoke. But I could see it, how it could be. I patched the drywall myself, laid vinyl tile in the kitchen, one slow strip at a time, with Bram sitting cross-legged and watching, like it was magic. I refinished the kitchen cabinets, painted every single room, grew tomatoes in the back corner of the yard where the sun hit longest. Every decision, every curtain rod, every plant, every crack I filled with caulk, it all came from me. I built something steady, predictable, not much maybe, but it was a place that stayed the same when the world outside kept turning upside down. And now it wasn't mine. Not because I sold it, not because I gave it away, but because someone else decided it was more useful without me in it. I opened my purse and pulled out the manila envelope I'd retrieved just before checking into the motor lodge. I'd kept it in a secure document vault, one of those places people use to store wills deeds and other papers that can't afford to disappear. Inside was the original copy of the deed from when I refinanced 6 years ago. I'd even had it re-notarized when Bram got married, just to be safe. That little house was still under my name the last time I checked. Still mine, for now. Unless... I sat up slowly, my thoughts beginning to spool out in tight threads. Bram was on my checking account. Years ago, I added him so he could help pay my bills if something ever happened to me. He was still listed on the emergency contacts at my bank, my primary care office, even my online utilities. I trusted him with the whole infrastructure of my life. The air in the room felt thinner. I reached into my coat pocket and took out my phone. I hadn't opened it since the ride home. 17 missed calls. 4 texts, all from Bram. I deleted them without opening a single one. Then I opened the banking app. It prompted me for facial recognition, then spun for a moment. When the screen loaded, my breath hitched. There was a wire transfer, dated 11 days ago. A large one. To an account that wasn't mine. I arrived at the bank just after opening hours. It was the same branch I'd used for 18 years back when the manager still wore a tie and called me Mrs. Murnane. No one recognized me now. The teller wore a tight smile and said she'd get someone from client services. A younger man came out barely older than Bram and ushered me into a glass cubicle near the back. His nameplate said Jeremy. His handshake was warm, but I didn't return it. "I'd like to review recent changes made to my mortgage account," I said. "Of course, Ms. Murnane. Do you have ID?" I handed him my license and sat stiffly while he typed. I could see the reflection of the screen in the glass wall behind him. Transaction histories, document titles, scrolling lines of my life. "I see a deed transfer was initiated 12 days ago," he said. "To Romero and Clarice Dennett. Is that correct?" "No," I said. "That's not correct." He frowned, clicked through something, then turned the monitor so I could see. "Here's the document. It was signed electronically. We have a copy of the signed authorization and notarized deed." He pulled up the PDF. My name, neat and curved, was at the bottom of the signature line. Thessaly L. Murnane. I stared at it. That's my name, but I didn't sign that. "I was in surgery that day." Jeremy blinked. "Surgery at the hospital. I had a stent placed, general anesthesia. I wasn't even conscious until the next morning." He looked at the timestamp. "It says the notary was remote. We use a vendor for that. Facial ID is used along with a verbal oath. It's pretty secure." I shook my head slowly. "Facial ID, not when someone's in a hospital gown with an oxygen mask on." He hesitated. "Would you like to file a dispute?" "Yes," I said. "And I'd like a full copy of the authorization trail, including the IP address and session log." Jeremy hesitated again. "I may need a subpoena for that." "Then you'll get one," I said. He printed the document and handed it to me. I held the paper in my lap, reading each line. The document was slick, professional, signed and stamped, filed and recorded. It looked real. It wasn't. I left the bank and sat in my car for a long time. The paper rested on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. It wasn't just the wire transfer. It wasn't just the boxes. They were clearing me out of my own life, legally, quietly, permanently. I thought of Esmara's voice at the door. My parents live here now. She hadn't said it like a warning. She'd said it like a done deal. Because to her, it was. I picked up the paper and looked at the signature again. Whoever did it had studied mine. The curl of the M, the slight tilt of the S in Thessaly. But they didn't know what I knew. I've signed hundreds of documents in my lifetime. Tax returns, loan applications, rental agreements. And every time I signed something real, I did the same thing. A small underline, just a flick under the final E in Murnane. It wasn't on this copy. I opened my phone and scrolled past Bram's calls. I went to my contacts and tapped one I hadn't used in 7 years. Mira Ralston, attorney. She answered on the second ring. "This is Mira." "It's Thessaly," I said. "I need help. And I need someone who remembers what my signature really looks like." The motel coffee tasted like scorched pennies and regret, but I drank it anyway. It sat heavy in the styrofoam cup, curling bitter steam into my face as I sat cross-legged on the bed papers spread across the threadbare quilt like a second life laid bare. The table lamp flickered every time the heater kicked in. I ignored it. I'd packed this envelope years ago after Bram got married. It was one of those quiet Saturday tasks, organizing tax returns copies of the original house deed, a copy of my husband's will. Mira had told me once back when we were still in contact. "Keep things tidy, Thess. No one respects chaos in court." She was right. So I had. Every revision, every refinance, every notarized copy account statements, health directives, living, will updates all organized in acid-free sleeves, labeled by year. My life didn't have much glamour, but it was documented down to the decimal. I ran my fingers along the edge of one folder. 2014, the year I put Bram on my checking account and named him my medical proxy. I remembered how proud he looked, like I'd knighted him. He said, "It means a lot that you trust me." Back then, I thought trust was something you gave because you loved someone. Now I knew better. I reviewed the authorization forms. No mention of power to transfer property. No mention of gifting rights. He had access to pay bills not to dismantle my name. The furnace rattled. I shuffled the stack again. Then I pulled out the slim black notebook that hadn't seen daylight in over a decade. Ledger 1, Property and Tax. I'd kept it manually for years, even when digital files became standard. Something about the rhythm of handwritten entries helped me see patterns faster than any spreadsheet. In it, I saw everything. What I paid for the house, what it appraised for each year, renovation costs, estimated appreciation. I even noted Bram's wedding expenses that I'd quietly covered when they ran short on their venue deposit. The page from July 2018 was the one that stung. It read, "Gift to Bram and Esmara, $14,000. Wedding contribution final verbal agreement. No return expected." I remembered how I said it aloud to myself, writing it in pen final verbal agreement, as if putting it on paper would make it understood. But that was the lie, wasn't it? The lie was thinking that generosity bought you respect. A knock rattled the door. I tensed, heart leaping, but it was only the motel clerk dropping off new towels. He didn't make eye contact. I closed the ledger and set it beside me. Then I opened a new notebook. This one would be different. This one would be cold. I dated the top corner. Entry 1, day after discovery of forged deed. I began listing everything I knew in my own handwriting. The timeline, the transfers, the bank activity, The changes to the curtain fabric, the missing underline in the forged signature, the exact time Esmara said, "My parents live here now." Details they would forget. Details I never did. By the time I reached the bottom of the first page, I had already outlined 3 paths Mira and I might take. Civil complaint. Notary fraud. Elder coercion. I underlined one word at the bottom: ownership. I capped the pen, sat back, and stared at the flickering light overhead. It was dim, but steady enough to work by. I took another sip of that awful coffee. My stomach turned, but my hands were steady now. And that was what mattered. Because the next place I was heading wouldn't serve coffee. It served records. And I needed one more piece of paper before I made my next move. I always thought the worst part of betrayal would be the pain, but it's not. It's the sorting. Sorting memories from facts, loyalty from paperwork, love from leverage. I stared at my phone for a full 10 minutes before I finally pressed the call button. Mira Ralston. Her tone shifted. I could hear the sharpness re-enter her voice like a pen clicking into place. Talk. And I did. I told her everything. I told her about the hospital stay, the missing porch plant, the new curtains, the cardboard boxes lined up in my own hallway. I told her about the transfer, the signature I didn't write, the wire that bled from my account without my hand behind it. I told her about the smile Esmara wore when she said, "My parents live here now." I didn't embellish. I didn't cry. I just laid it all down like tiles in a hallway I was building for her to walk through. When I finished, Mira didn't speak for a few seconds. Then I heard a chair scrape a keyboard tap, the sound of legal focus snapping into place. "You're still the sole name on the title?" she asked. Was. "The signature on the deed says otherwise now. But the power of attorney forms you never authorized property transfer. Only bill payments, no gifting rights. I have copies. You always did," she murmured. I waited. Then she said, "I believe you. Let's begin." I closed my eyes. "Good," I said, "because I want this reversed. Legally. Quietly if we can. Loudly if we must." Mira clicked her tongue. "I'll need copies of everything. Originals too when we meet. I want the signature samples, the ledger, any photos of the property's current state." "I started a new log," I said, "with timestamps." "Of course you did." I heard the smile in her voice. "Start forwarding things to my secure inbox. We'll file for a fraud claim and temporary injunction first. If the notary system logged a false facial ID, that gives us a second angle. And the wire transfer, we'll include it in the asset freeze request. And if we're lucky, they won't have moved the funds yet." She paused. "And Bram." I hesitated. "I don't know if he's behind it or just too weak to stop it." "Doesn't matter," she said. "Intent will come out later. Right now, we focus on the paper." I leaned back against the wall, the cheap wood paneling pressing into my shoulder blades. "Mira," I said softly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "I haven't started sharpening the knife." Then more gently, "I never forgot what you did for me after my divorce. I always told myself if you ever called, I'd answer." I didn't have a reply to that, but something in my chest settled. She gave me a time to meet. Her office now overlooked the courthouse in Belford. It would be a long drive, but worth it. After we hung up, I packed everything into 2 neat folders and zipped them into my bag. Then I made one last call. This one wasn't to a lawyer. It was to the county recorder's office. Mira met me at the Belford County Clerk's office, coat still flapping behind her, like she'd walked out of one courtroom and into another. She looked exactly the same gray at the temples now, maybe, but with that same razor focus in her eyes. She handed me a coffee as we walked through the double glass doors. "You'll want this." It wasn't motel coffee. It was sharp, hot, and bitter. I drank half of it before we even reached the records counter. The clerk behind the desk was a thin woman in a rust cardigan with a badge that said Tanya. She glanced at the file number Mira had scribbled on the form and nodded. "This was recorded 2 weeks ago," Tanya said. clicking through her screen. 2 documents, a general power of attorney and a gift deed, transferring full ownership from Thessaly Murnane to Romero and Clarice Dennett. Recorded same day. Back-to-back entries. Mira leaned in. I'd like to see both. Tanya printed them and slid the pages across. Mira handed them to me first. I recognized my name at the top, the font, the formatting. But the signature wasn't right. Not quite. Too smooth on the tail of the Y. Too sharp in the M. I set that one aside and picked up the next. Another signature. Different ink, different slant. Mira raised an eyebrow. They don't match. No, they don't, I said. Let me guess, one was signed at 2:14 p.m., the other at 2:27. Tanya glanced at the screen. Exactly. Mira turned to me. What day was your surgery? March 12th, I replied. General anesthesia. They intubated me at 2:05. She gave a low whistle. So you signed a gift deed in one room while unconscious in another. I nodded once. Impressive, isn't it? Mira jotted something down on her notepad. We'll subpoena the notary logs and video captures. The POA and deed should have required separate notarizations. That's 2 verifications, not 1 blanket approval. I flipped the page over. This signature on the power of attorney looks more like mine than the one on the deed. She narrowed her eyes. That tells me they copied from different samples. Someone rushed. Tanya cleared her throat gently. Do you want certified copies? Yes, please, Mira said, without missing a beat. Stamped, dated, and sealed. As Tanya stepped away, I whispered, Will this be enough? It's a start, Mira said. You'd be surprised how many paper crimes unravel when you introduce actual paper into the mix. They think no one looks. That once it's filed, it's law. She glanced at me sideways. But you've always been the kind who reads the fine print, haven't you? I gave her a tight smile. And writes it too. We left the clerk's office with the sealed copies tucked in Mira's leather briefcase. The sky outside had turned a dull pewter, and the courthouse bell rang somewhere in the distance. Mira slowed as we reached her car. They moved fast, she said. Too fast. They counted on you being quiet, tired, or gone. Then they miscounted. She looked at me. Then not like a client, not even like an old friend. Like someone she could go to battle with. You want to hit this all at once, she said, or drip it like water on stone. I want it done right, I said. Mira nodded. We'll start with a formal fraud petition and get an emergency hearing. But to really make this stick, we'll need more than mismatched signatures. Like what I asked. She opened the door to her car. Like someone willing to tell the truth before they're forced to. The bracelet looked like costume jewelry, rose gold and unremarkable. Mira snapped it gently around my wrist, her fingers moving fast but careful. It holds 6 hours of audio, she said. Press this tiny ridge here to start. Again to stop. Don't tap it nervously, just once clean. Let it run. Is it legal? In this state, one-party consent? That party is you? I turned my wrist, staring at it. I hadn't worn jewelry in months, not since the swelling after my last round of medication. But today, it fit. Are you sure I should be the one to go? I asked. Yes, Mira said. She needs to believe she's already won. And so I went. It took 3 knocks for Esmara to open the front door. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her nails painted something glossy and pale. She looked surprised, but only for a second. Well, she said. Look who's standing. I thought we should talk, I said. I've had time to cool down. She gave me a long look. Bram's not here. I came to talk to you. She stepped aside without smiling. Make it quick. The house was cleaner than I expected, sterile even. Gone were my floral throw pillows, the crocheted blanket from my sister, the framed photo of Bram on the porch steps with a gap-toothed grin. The walls were bare, waiting for someone else's story. I brought you something, I said. She tilted her head. I handed her a small paper bag with store-bought lemon muffins. Her smile came slowly, like fog creeping across a window. How thoughtful. I kept my voice steady. You said your parents were getting settled. Oh, they love it here, she said breezily. This house suits us better than that cramped condo. It breathes. I nodded. And the transfer. Everything went through. Of course. She laughed lightly. You made it easier than you think. I watched her closely. She didn't flinch. Didn't look guilty. Just proud. You know, she said, leaning against the kitchen island. Bram always said you wouldn't let go until you had no choice. Is that what this was about? Giving me no choice. It was about protecting what's ours now, she said. And frankly, you looked tired. This house is better off with people who can use it fully. You can rest now. She poured herself water from the fridge pitcher. Same pitcher I'd used for a decade, though the handle had a new crack. You built something nice, she added. But it's time for the next generation to build on top of it. My fingers hovered near the bracelet. I didn't press anything. It had been running since I stepped in. I looked around. The baseboard still bore the tiny dent Bram made with his toy truck when he was 6. My kitchen clock was gone, but the hook where it hung was still crooked. They hadn't scrubbed me out completely, just enough to feel triumphant. Well, I said, lifting my chin, I just wanted to see how you were doing. She smirked. You've seen. We're thriving. I walked back to the door, slowly letting my hand trail along the banister. Right before I stepped out, she called after me. You didn't need to come all this way just to say goodbye. I turned to her with a smile I didn't feel. Neither did you, I said. Then I stepped outside the bracelet, humming silently against my skin, carrying every word she'd just handed me. The next day, I returned. No bracelet this time, just me holding a small box of supposed trinkets I claimed I'd forgotten in the linen closet. I told Esmara I didn't want to be a bother. She told me I wasn't. The front door was already unlocked. Inside, her parents had made themselves comfortable. Romero Dennett was sitting in my late husband's chair. His chair with a tablet on his knee and a swatch of paint samples fanned across the ottoman. Clarice stood near the window, squinting at the light, as if the angle offended her. Ah, Thessaly Romero said, as if he'd been expecting me. We were just talking about repainting. I gave a faint smile. Oh, this room gets great sun, but the walls are too flat for it. I'm thinking warm cream, maybe a sage accent. He tapped one of the samples. And the back bedroom will be my study. I've been needing a proper den. I felt something twist in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I never liked sage, I said lightly. Romero chuckled, missing the point entirely. Good thing taste can evolve. Clarice gave a little wave. We moved your old recipe box to the garage. It didn't really match the new decor. I nodded, as if they were talking about someone else's life. I heard footsteps behind me. Esmara entered, smoothing down her shirt like she'd just come from somewhere she didn't want questioned. Just a few things from the closet. I thought I'd ask before they ended up in a garage sale, I said. Oh, don't be dramatic, she said with a half smile. We wouldn't sell anything without checking. She walked over to me, her voice lowering slightly, as Romero kept rambling about paint undertones. We assumed you'd go quietly, she said. Honestly, the hospital stay helped? I tilted my head. Helped how? She shrugged. The timing, the silence. It made things easier. You were already half out the door. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I didn't move. We thought you'd just fade, she added. Like wallpaper. Like dust. I turned away to hide the heat rising in my throat. On the mantel sat a framed photo of Clarice and Romero at some retirement party where my picture of Bram's kindergarten graduation used to be. I studied the room one last time. Every item they'd moved, every trace they'd erased, told me the same thing: they weren't stealing my house. They were rewriting it. Page by page. Romero held up a new tile sample, beaming. This might look sharp in the downstairs bath. The current one's too quaint. I couldn't breathe through my rage, so I smiled instead. Well, I said I won't stay long. I'll grab my things and be on my way. Of course, as Mara said, already turning away. Take your time, but not too much. I walked down the hall slowly, as if the walls could still speak to me. In the linen closet, I retrieved a small shoebox, not because I needed it, but because it gave me a reason to look at the built-in shelves Bram once helped me paint. The paint had chipped in one corner, revealing the soft yellow from when it was still his nursery. I touched it briefly, then closed the door. Back in the living room, I passed Romero and Clarice again. They didn't look up. As I stepped outside, the wind picked up, rustling the ivy I once trimmed every spring. I walked to my car, started the engine, and placed the shoebox gently on the passenger seat. Inside, it was nothing I needed. Outside, it was everything they'd taken. For weeks, I let them believe I was done. I played the part, the tired woman bruised from surgery, overwhelmed by change, quietly fading into her motel room. I didn't call. I didn't stop by. I let the silence thicken around them like warm fog. And in that quiet, I built the foundation. First came the hospital documents. I requested the full surgical log, the intake chart, anesthesia records, timestamps, and post-op notes. The nurse coordinator, a kind woman named Darla, even printed the hallway security footage showing I never left the recovery wing. That alone placed me under supervision for the exact hour they claimed I signed the deed. Next came the notary's logbook. Mira handled that with sharp efficiency, issuing a subpoena through her firm's name so it wouldn't alert anyone connected to Bram or Esmara. The notary's signature was real, but the ID scan attached was not mine. The photo used was an outdated DMV image. The timestamp placed it on the 12th of March. Mira cross-checked it with hospital entry logs. "That's the day they intubated you," she said. "You couldn't have signed anything, let alone held a pen." I nodded, handing her the matching set of forged signatures I'd found on file from an old holiday card. "I think they traced it from this." Mira didn't say anything for a long while. Then she whispered, "They used your own handwriting against you. We added it to the file." Then the bank. The wire transfer $48,000 had been moved in small batches from my checking to a shared joint account Bram had added himself to years ago. We could trace every transaction. Mira's assistant found the IP addresses logged into the online portal during the days I was unconscious. They came from my home's network, not the hospital. Each piece felt like a breath released after holding it too long. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. They had counted on both. By the end of the second week, Mira had a full draft of the fraud and elder coercion complaint. It was 27 pages long and read like a storm gathering. We met in her office, a quiet space lined with old law journals and one framed quote above her desk. "The truth is rarely loud." She handed me the packet. "If we file this, we trigger discovery. That means depositions, subpoenas, court hearings. And it becomes public." I looked down at the neatly clipped pages. "That's fine. You're sure you're ready for that kind of fight?" "They picked the battlefield," I said. "I'm just walking onto it." She nodded, satisfied. Then she added, "We also file for emergency relief, a temporary freeze on the property. If the judge signs off, they can't refinance, sell, or alter it." "Do it," I said. "Before they change the locks." Mira slid the folder into her leather case. "They'll panic," she warned. "I'm counting on it." We scheduled the filing for the following Tuesday. It gave me the weekend to gather a few more statements, neighbors, my surgeon, even the pharmacist who delivered my medication while I was bedridden. I wasn't just building a case. I was restoring a timeline. Every missing moment, every silenced hour, they were now accounted for. And once the papers were filed, there'd be no going back. I stepped out of Mira's office into the cold air and pulled my coat tighter. It was almost time to deliver the first real blow, and this time it wouldn't be quiet. The call came early, too early for panic to sound composed. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee, the window cracked just enough to let in the morning chill. The phone vibrated across the table. Bram's name lit up the screen. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. "Mom?" he said, breath short. "What did you do?" I didn't speak right away. He rushed ahead. "The house is frozen. Romero tried to access the refinancing forms and the bank said it was locked under court order." "What the hell is going on?" I took a sip of coffee, slow and quiet. "Nothing yet," I said, calmly. "That's just a pause." "You can't do this," he said. "You can't just weaponize paperwork." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what I'm doing?" "You're making things difficult. Esmara's parents are in the middle of updating the place." "They've spent money, Mom. We all have." "You said I never said anything," I interrupted. "I wasn't given a choice." He went quiet. I continued. "You filed documents on my behalf, transferred my property, used my signature while I was unconscious, forged a notary log, and you used a hospital stay to vanish me out of my own life. That's not what happened," he said. Voice clipped. "No," I asked. "Then tell me, what did you sign? And why didn't you ask me first?" He exhaled hard. "Esmara said you wanted to simplify, that you told her the house was too much, and you believed her. I thought maybe you were tired. You'd been slowing down and you never asked." He didn't respond. I stared at the window, the street outside just beginning to stir. "You didn't even visit me at the hospital." "I sent flowers. You sent a form letter and a basket of fruit. You let them treat me like luggage. Something to move while I wasn't watching." He sounded smaller now. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I almost laughed. "You already made it hard. You just thought I wouldn't fight." A beat passed. "I'm your son," he said, quieter. "I didn't mean for it to go like this. You signed me away. Mom, you gave up the woman who raised you for convenience. You let them erase me." His voice broke then, just a little. "I didn't know they forged anything. I swear I didn't know about that." I believed that part. It didn't absolve him. "They wanted the house. And what did you want? Bram, peace, distance. Less guilt. I didn't want a war. You started one the moment you handed over a pen." He fell silent again. Then, "So what now?" I took another sip of coffee. "Now," I said, "we see what the judge thinks." He tried to speak again, but I ended the call. No yelling, no last word. Just silence. I placed the phone on the table and folded my hands around the mug, letting the heat soak into my skin. I had mourned my husband. I had mourned the home I built. And now, for the first time, I felt the grief of realizing my only child saw me as an obstacle. But I wouldn't crumble. Not for them. Not anymore. Mira called late that evening. I was folding laundry in the quiet, half watching a rerun of a courtroom show that felt too ironic now. Thus she said, her voice tight with energy. "I found something." I sat down, slowly. "Go on." "You told me your husband handled the title transfer years ago before he passed." "Yes. We had it notarized through his old firm, Sampson and Roy." Why, she exhaled. I dug through the county archives again, checking the chain of title. Your original deed from when Thomas placed it solely in your name wasn't just a standard transfer. It wasn't, no. It included a reversion clause. I blinked. A what? Mira sounded almost triumphant. A clause that states if the property is ever transferred under coercion fraud or without the grantor's conscious and documented consent, it automatically reverts to the original owner's estate. That clause was embedded in the filing, and because it wasn't nullified or superseded, it's still legally enforceable. I sat still, letting the words settle. They didn't check the filing history. Thess. They filed that forged gift deed, assuming the current title was clean. But they didn't know Thomas protected you. And now that clause is going to save you. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. He knew I murmured. Mira paused. What Thomas? He always worried someone might try to take advantage of me. I used to think he was just being dramatic, but he knew how fragile security could be after he was gone. Mira continued. With this, we're not just arguing fraud, we're activating a legal reversal. And it holds up. It holds up. We were both quiet a moment. Then I said, "What's our next move?" I file the addendum with the judge in the morning. We bring the original documents notarized and certified. This shifts the burden back to them, Esmara Romero Claris. If they continue living there after the clause is enforced, they'll be considered unlawful occupants. Even Bram Mira hesitated. He wasn't a signatory on the fraudulent deed, but his joint account activity ties him to the financial misconduct. It won't be ignored. I swallowed hard. He'll blame her. He already does. He made his choices. Yes, I said. So did I. The next morning, I stood before the mirror brushing out my hair like it was just any other Tuesday. But something had changed. Not just the legal tide, but the weight inside me. I no longer felt like someone clinging to scraps. I was someone with ground beneath her feet again. Later that afternoon, Mira sent a brief text. Filed. It's done. No fanfare, no speeches. Just a quiet shift in power. That night, I received an email notification from the county clerk's office. Title, update, submitted for review, 118 Harridan Way. Pending reversion. The house was still full of their voices, but the name on the papers was mine again. And soon, they'd know it. He found me outside the pharmacy. I had just picked up my prescription blood pressure, nothing dramatic, and was tucking it into my purse when I heard him call my name. Not yell, it just say it with the tone of someone who expects to be listened to. Thessaly. I turned slowly, squinting under the brim of my hat. Romero Dennett stood by the curb, hands shoved into the pockets of his pressed windbreaker, the kind older men wear when they want to seem casual but prepared for a lawsuit. Romero, I said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We need to talk. I gently turned my wrist, letting the inside of the bracelet face upward. With a light tap on the stone, the recorder activated. Mira had shown me how to use it. I didn't hide it. I didn't need to. I don't think we do, I said, keeping my tone light. I've been patient, he began, but this is going too far. Is that so? You're 70, he said, like it was a crime. What do you need a whole house for? You should be downsizing, simplifying. That property is too much for someone in your condition. My condition? I didn't blink. It's not a good look. He continued, his voice rising just enough for a passing woman to glance at us. Dragging your family through court just to cling to an address. You think people respect that? They respect boundaries, I said quietly, and laws. His jaw twitched. You're blowing this up. Esmara's embarrassed. Bram's humiliated. Claris can't sleep. I wanted to ask if they ever thought of that when they moved me out behind my back. You had your turn, Romero snapped. You raised your kid, you buried your husband fine. But now it's time to pass it down. That's not how it works. You can't even manage the stairs, he said. And you're fighting to hold on to a place that was never meant to end with you. I looked him square in the face. You're wrong. It was meant to start with me and end with whoever earned it. He stepped closer. Voice low now. Venom wrapped in civility. Do you really want this to get uglier? Because I promise you, I've been in courtrooms longer than you've been collecting Social Security. That may be true, I said. But I've survived worse than men who raise their voices in parking lots. He stared at me, nostrils flaring, fists clenched. And then just like that, he turned and walked back to his car, muttering something under his breath that I didn't need to hear. I'd already gotten what I came for. I stopped the recording. 6 minutes, 34 seconds. Every word preserved. I sent the file to Mira the moment I got back to the motel. Her reply was almost immediate. Good. We'll use it for tone. Coercive language, veiled threats. Classic entitlement. It supports the reversion narrative. I set the phone down, hands steady. They still thought this was about sentiment, that I was some fragile old woman clinging to the past. What they didn't understand was that this wasn't about wallpaper or family photos. It was about what happens when someone tries to replace you in your own story and thinks you'll thank them for the favor. Mira filed the suit on a Tuesday. By Thursday morning, we were in front of Judge Kaminsky, a no-nonsense type with a steel gaze and a calendar that barely allowed time for pleasantries. Good. We didn't need pleasantries. Esmara showed up in a fitted blazer and stilettos that clicked far too loudly against the marble floors. Clarice stood behind her, like a statue carved out of irritation, clutching a purse too large for any courtroom. Romero didn't come in. He waited in the car, apparently. Bram never showed. Mira and I sat quietly, papers stacked in front of us in exact order, labeled and indexed. She was calm, hair tied back, voice clear and patient as she presented the facts, the date of surgery, the notarized reversion clause, the financial irregularities, the fraudulent deed, and lastly, the audio recording. She didn't even need to play it. Judge Kaminsky read the transcript, sighed once, and then turned to their side. Esmara's attorney, a man named Farrell, with too much cologne and not enough case, tried to argue that the transfer had been consensual, that the documents were poorly tracked, but valid, that Thessaly had expressed dissatisfaction with the burden of homeownership. Judge Kaminsky raised an eyebrow. "You have that in writing." Farrell hesitated. "No, Your Honor, but the family assumed assumptions are not evidence," Kaminsky said sharply, "and the notary logs don't match. The medical timeline contradicts the signature. And I see here a clause in the original deed regarding forced transfer nullification." Mira slid the original page forward with a quiet nod. He reviewed it again, then set it down. "I'm granting a temporary injunction," he said, "effective immediately. The property at 118 Harridan Way may not be rented, sold, transferred, or altered in any material way. No occupants may remain inside the residence until the ownership status is clarified through further proceedings." Esmara's head snapped toward me like a whip. "You can't do this," she hissed. "My parents live there. We painted the walls. That house is ours now." The judge didn't flinch. "You'll need to vacate within 72 hours unless you wish to pursue a writ of emergency relief. But given the evidence, I don't recommend it." "Are you joking?" she shrieked, rising to her feet. "You're kicking us out because of an old woman who forgot what she signed." I stood then, slow and steady, and looked her directly in the eyes. "I didn't forget," I said. "I was never given the chance." The bailiff gently motioned Esmara toward the exit, and she stormed past Mira and me in a blur of perfume and rage. Outside the courthouse steps, she exploded. "You witch!" she screamed. "You bitter, lonely, manipulative woman, you want to die in that house alone? Go ahead. But don't expect anyone to cry at your funeral." People turned. Phones came out. Someone started recording. Mira touched my elbow. "Let's go." We walked past her. Not fast, not slow, just enough to show the moment didn't belong to her anymore. Romero stepped out of the car. Face, red jaw locked. He didn't say a word. Clarice looked like she might cry, but didn't. As I reached the sidewalk, I stopped, turned back once and said, "Only this. You thought silence meant surrender." Then I got into Mira's car, shut the door behind me, and looked straight ahead. We had 72 hours before the house was empty again, and I knew exactly what I would do with the time. The car was parked 2 houses down, tucked behind a hedgerow. I didn't need to be close, I just needed to see. The moving truck had come and gone. The house stood half hollow now, its porch. Bare curtains unhooked. The front door was open, letting in a heavy silence that even the wind refused to stir. And then they stepped out, Esmera, first storming down the steps, with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder like she was escaping a fire. Bram followed slower, not yelling, but clearly on edge. I cracked my window slightly. "You said she wouldn't do anything." She snapped, her voice sharp and shaking. "You said she'd give up, that she was tired." "She was in the hospital," Bram muttered, running a hand through his hair. I thought, hell, I don't know what I thought. Esmera turned to him, livid. "You didn't think. You just nodded along. Let your mother get pushed out of her own home like she was a leftover chore. Now look, I didn't forge anything," he hissed back. "That was Romero and your mother, but it's your name on the joint account. Your initials on the bank transfer. You bought the paint, Bram." He stared at the ground. She wasn't supposed to fight. That sentence made my stomach twist. Esmera laughed bitterly. "Well, she did. She fought. And now we're out. Your daughter's crib is still upstairs and we're not even allowed to touch the doorknob. You think I don't know that he barked? Oh, I think you're just now waking up," she spat. "You wanted to be the good son without getting your hands dirty." "Well, too late. Everyone sees it now." They stood in the driveway, face to face. I could see the crack between them widening. "You chose comfort over courage," she said, quieter this time. "You let them do it to her. And now we're living the fallout." Bram didn't answer. He just looked back at the house like it owed him something. Like maybe if he stared hard enough, the windows would forgive him. But they didn't. They never do. Esmera's phone buzzed. She checked it, then turned away. "We're staying at my sister's," she muttered. "She's not happy, but it's better than this circus." "And me?" She shrugged. "I don't care where you go, Bram, but don't follow me." She walked off without waiting. He stood there another minute, shoulders sagging, hands in his jacket pockets, like a boy sent out of class without knowing why. Then he finally turned and walked toward his car. I didn't move until he was gone. Did I feel satisfaction? No, not exactly. It wasn't victory that warmed me, it was clarity. He had made a choice, and so had I. They thought I would fade. But now it was they who had to retreat. The house waited empty once again, but not for long. It started with a name on the discharge papers. I hadn't noticed it the first time, but there it was, written in blue ink at the bottom corner of the final shift report, Nurse M. Grellin. Mira had said the more first-hand evidence we had, the tighter the case would become. So I picked up the phone, called the hospital's patient care line, and asked politely, but firmly, if Nurse Grellin was still working. She was. Night shift, same floor. I showed up on a Thursday, just before 7 p.m., and waited outside the staff entrance. I held the printout in one hand, my scarf wrapped tight in the other. It was early March, still cold enough to remind you where you lived. When she came around the corner, I recognized her right away. Tall, broad-shouldered hair twisted into a thick bun. The same calm presence I vaguely remembered waking to in half glimpses of beeping monitors and late-night checks. "Excuse me," I said softly. "Are you Monsieur Grellin?" She paused, wary. "Yes." I handed her the paper. "You were my nurse for 3 nights. I was recovering from a stent procedure." She glanced at the name, then back at me. "Mrs. Murnane." "That's right." Recognition settled into her face. "You're the one who kept asking for your wedding ring?" Said it felt strange to have a pulse without it. I smiled faintly. "That sounds like me." She relaxed. "You doing okay, mostly? But I need your help." I told her gently, carefully what had happened. About the forged signature, the deed, the date it was signed. I didn't accuse. I just laid out the facts. She listened without interrupting, arms folded, jaw tightening the further I went. Finally, she said, "That was your 3rd night post-op. You were still under partial sedation. They had you on hydromorphone and lorazepam. You could barely hold a cup of water. Could I have signed a legal document? She looked me square in the face. No, not a chance. I had to help you push the call button. Would you be willing to testify? She nodded immediately. Yes, absolutely. I document everything, and I remember you. A quiet breath escaped my chest. Thank you, I whispered. I hate this kind of thing, she muttered. People think they can walk all over someone just because they're quiet or recovering. Makes my blood boil. She reached into her bag and pulled out a notepad. Write down your attorney's name. I'll call her on my break. I scribbled Mira's number and handed it back. We stood there for a beat. Then she smiled. You know, she said there was something else I remember. One night you were half asleep and said, I'm coming back home no matter what. Thought you were dreaming. I blinked. Maybe I was, but maybe I wasn't. She nodded once and disappeared into the building badge, beeping her through the door. That night, I called Mira and told her everything. She's solid, I said. She remembers the sedation protocol. She's willing to stand in court. Mira's voice sharpened. That's our nail. We drive it in next week. The lie wasn't just unraveling, it was collapsing. And this time, the truth had a witness. The courtroom smelled like old carpet and fresh nerves. I sat beside Mira at the petitioner's table, a fresh folder of documents open in front of her. A calm, steady rhythm to her movements. Across the aisle, Farrell looked like a man already composing excuses. Esmara was stiff in her seat arms, crossed lips, tight. Clarice sat beside her, shifting uncomfortably every few minutes. Still no Romero. Still no Bram. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Kaminsky entered with the same unreadable expression he'd worn at the injunction hearing. But this time, his eyes paused longer on me. Proceed, he said. Mira stood. Your Honor, today will present 4 pieces of key evidence: medical records, a hospital nurse's testimony, time-stamped notary logs, and the deed chain dating back to 1991, when Mr. Hugh Murnane originally transferred property ownership to the petitioner. Kaminsky nodded. Proceed. First, the nurse. Mira had arranged a virtual testimony for Nurse Grellin. Her calm, unwavering voice came through the monitor. She confirmed my sedation schedule, listed the drugs I'd been on, and detailed how I could not have signed anything that week, let alone in front of a notary. Next came the notary log. According to the official stamp, my signature had been witnessed at 3:12 p.m. on February 9th, the very hour I was in recovery, unconscious, under sedation, vitals still unstable. The notary's office had since revoked the clerk's certification for irregularities unrelated to my case. Mira made sure that footnote landed with impact. Then came the deed trail. Mira placed the documents in sequence, like lining up dominoes. She highlighted my husband's reversion clause, the line stating that any unauthorized or coerced transfer would render the deed null and restore ownership to the surviving spouse's estate. Finally, the audio. 6 minutes and 34 seconds of Romero's voice, layered with arrogance, veiled threats, and entitlement. He said the words. They were recorded. You're too old. That house wasn't meant to end with you. You want to die there alone. Silence followed the playback. Even Esmara didn't look up. Then Mira sat down, and for a brief moment, the courtroom was still. Farrell stood and offered a strained defense, insisting on miscommunication, on the spirit of inheritance, on family confusion during a stressful time. Judge Kaminsky didn't even blink. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and direct. I've reviewed the documents, heard the witness, and examined the audio transcript. The facts are clear. The deed transfer was fraudulent. The signature was forged. The power of attorney filing was invalid. The reversion clause stands. He turned to me. Mrs. Murnane ownership of 118 Harridan Way is fully restored to you, effective immediately. Then he looked across the aisle. All opposing parties are hereby ordered to cease claims to the property vacate any attempts to alter, sell, or represent it, and surrender any duplicate keys or access devices within 72 hours. Esmara let out a breath that sounded more like a curse. Clarice looked like she wanted to crawl out of the room. Farrell closed his folder with a slow, defeated thud. Kaminsky continued. Furthermore, based on the evidence of coordination and intent, the matter of financial restitution may be brought to civil court, should the petitioner choose. I felt Mira glance at me, but I didn't nod. Not yet. Not here. The gavel came down once. Court adjourned. We stood slowly. Mira shook the judge's hand. I did not. I simply turned, walking past Esmara and Clarice without a glance. Outside, the air was crisp and the sky a sharp blue. I breathed in deeply, my heels clicking against the concrete steps as we descended together side by side. No press, no audience, no celebration, just dignity, and the slow return of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. The house was mine again. But before I returned to it, there was one more place I needed to go. The locksmith arrived 10 minutes early. I liked that. Punctuality meant care. He was young, polite, and didn't ask questions when I said change every lock, every handle, and check the garage and basement doors too. He nodded and got to work. I stood on the porch, my fingers brushing the trim of the doorframe still chipped in the corner from when Bram had swung the screen door too hard at 13. I had meant to fix it then. Never got around to it. Funny how some imperfections stay, just to remind you who's walked through. The door opened with a heavy sigh, and I stepped inside. It smelled wrong. Not terrible, not rotten, just wrong. Like someone else's detergent, someone else's habits. The air wasn't mine anymore, but it would be. Room by room, I moved like a woman measuring time. In the living room, I peeled back the throw Esmara had draped over the sofa. Beneath it was the old corduroy cushion Bram used to nap on during flu seasons. I left it uncovered. The dining table was gone, replaced with something glossy and sharp-edged. I didn't care. I'd sit on the floor if I had to. The kitchen still had my spice rack emptied, though. Probably replaced with Himalayan salt and dry herb blends she never used. I turned on the sink. The water pressure was still good. Upstairs, I paused outside what had once been my bedroom. They'd painted it a pale beige, neutral, impersonal, the kind of color you choose when you plan to erase what came before. But they hadn't taken everything. Behind a stack of boxes in the closet boxes marked seasonal decor, I found it. The photo. Hugh and I at the county fair, summer of '91. He's holding up a ridiculous prize bear. I'm squinting at the sun, laughing, like I hadn't yet known grief. We looked real, still in the middle of becoming. I sat on the edge of the bed, not my bed anymore, just a bed, and held it in both hands. There was no dust. They'd handled it, moved it, but they didn't throw it out. That mattered more than I wanted it to. I walked through the rest of the rooms. Guest bath. Empty nursery. Bram's old office now stripped bare. His diploma still hung behind the door. I left it. He could take it when he was ready. The locksmith called out. Last one's done, ma'am. I walked downstairs. Thank you. Can you leave the extras on the counter? He nodded and left me 3 gleaming new sets. I placed one in my coat pocket and the others in the drawer where the emergency flashlight used to be. After he left, I stood in the doorway again. Quiet. No footsteps above. No voices in the kitchen. No one telling me what needed to change. This was mine again, not just the house. The silence. The knowing. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, real coffee, not whatever sweet vanilla syrup Esmara used to drown hers in, and poured it into my favorite chipped mug. the one with the bird painted on it, half the wing worn off. Then I walked to the back door, stepped outside, and stood in the middle of the yard. The garden had gone a bit wild. Good. Let it grow. It was still there. So was I. And now that everything was secure, it was time to decide what stayed and what didn't. I wrote the letter slowly, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally understood that I didn't have to say everything. Not anymore. The hardest part wasn't the beginning. It was stopping myself from softening the truth, from making it palatable for him. For Bram, the boy I raised with chipped knuckles and thrift store sneakers, the man who stood beside the woman who erased me with a signature and a smile. No, this time, I wouldn't make the truth gentle. I told him that I knew what he had done. I told him that silence, when used to avoid complicity, becomes a form of it. I reminded him that I had not vanished. He had simply looked away long enough to pretend I had. I said that the house he once called home had never been about bricks or keys. It was built with years he didn't remember and sacrifices he never asked about. And I told him clearly, I don't hate you, but I no longer wait for you. I sealed the envelope, wrote only his name on the front, and tucked it between the screen door and the frame of his apartment, just as I used to do with his school permission slips when he forgot them in the morning rush. I didn't knock. I didn't wait. As I walked back to the car, I passed the window where his daughter's art projects used to hang. The glass was bare now. Maybe she'd outgrown crayons. Or maybe they'd just stopped taping things up. Either way, I didn't pause. Back home, the mailbox still creaked the way it always had. The gravel in the driveway still crunched a rhythm I could follow blindfolded. Inside, the coffee had cooled. I poured a fresh cup. On the counter, the third set of house keys sat untouched. I didn't know yet what I'd do with them. Maybe nothing. Maybe something. But I knew they wouldn't be mailed. Not anymore. That chapter had closed with the click of every lock I had changed. I sat down at the kitchen table, my table again, and watched the light fade through the window. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt right. Balanced. The court hadn't restored me. The paper hadn't vindicated me. But I had done it. Piece by piece. Quietly. Without fanfare. And now I could live not in the shadow of their schemes, but in the quiet certainty that I had returned to myself. Whatever Bram did with the letter didn't matter. I had said what needed saying, and I didn't need to hear the reply, because sometimes the final word isn't shouted. Sometimes it's a door that doesn't open again, and I had just closed mine. It took me 3 appointments to finish what I started. Mira came with me the first time, sitting across from the estate attorney, like a quiet wall of steel. I didn't need her to speak. Just having her there kept my voice steady. I want to rewrite everything I told the attorney. Every line, every clause. We began with the obvious ownership of the house. Legally restored, but now redirected. This house, I said, will never fall into the hands of someone who treats family like leverage. He nodded, pen poised. Where do you want it to go? I slid a card across the table. Hearth and Harbor. Home a shelter for senior women. I'd volunteered there once, back when Bram was still in school. The women came with stories, some quieter than mine, but all sharp-edged beneath the surface. They don't need speeches, I said. They need shelter. And the rest of your estate, the attorney asked. There's not much, I said with a dry smile. But what there is will be placed in a trust. Not for Bram. Not for Esmara. And not for anyone who stood back while they watched me vanish. He nodded again. Beneficiaries. None named. The trust will be handled through the shelter's fund manager to support those who've been pushed aside. The attorney looked surprised, but respectful. And your son? He asked. I reached into my coat pocket and handed him a folded sheet of paper. 1 sentence typed in clean black ink. Never mistake proximity for love. He read it twice, then tucked it into the file without another word. I didn't feel bitter. That was the surprising part. I had expected anger to carry me to this moment, but instead I felt clear. Light, even. Not because I had cut them out, but because I had made room for something better. Not punishment, purpose. The third appointment was quiet. Just me. I initialed every page signed at the last line and slid the pen across the table. Then I walked outside, down the courthouse steps, and felt the sun warm the back of my neck. No applause, no confrontation, but peace. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. Back home, I placed the new documents in the fireproof box, where Hugh's letters still lived. I poured myself one final cup of coffee and sat in the sunroom. The light hit the table just right, casting long shadows across the hardwood. That's when I realized this wasn't about legacy. It was about reclaiming voice mine. Not the voice that once begged to be heard, the one that no longer needed to speak to be understood. And with the last paper signed, the locks changed, and the silence unbroken, there was just one more thing left to do before I closed this chapter for good. It was a Thursday when I saw her again, Mrs. Ellenwood, from across the street. She'd lived there nearly as long as I had, though we'd never been close. Not unfriendly, just distant in the way older neighbors sometimes are, everyone minding their own laundry lines and grocery routines. She stood at the edge of her yard with pruning shears in one hand, blinking at me as I swept leaves from the porch. "You're back," she called out. Her tone was half statement, half question. I didn't answer right away. Just looked around at the garden beds I'd reclaimed, the rusted wind chimes I'd rehung the porch railing Hugh had built, with the slight slant still in it. My hands rested on the broom handle. Then I smiled. "I never left," I said. She squinted. "Well, you weren't here." I nodded once. "I just gave them time to show me who they really were." She didn't reply, but she stared a beat longer, like she was trying to decide whether that was a riddle or just the truth. Then she returned to her rosebush, and I went back to my sweeping. The wind shifted. Not cold, not warm, just honest. That afternoon, I opened the windows, let the air move freely through the house again. No artificial candles, no furniture that didn't belong. Just the creak of floorboards and the slow breath of a house being lived in. I cooked for myself that night something simple. An egg sandwich and soup. Not because I was lonely, but because I liked the sound of the pan sizzling. I turned on the radio, an old station with scratchy jazz, and let it play as I ate. Outside, the street was quiet. No one came by. No one needed to, because I was no longer waiting to be invited back into my own life. I looked at the clock once. The time Bram used to call when he forgot his work badge or needed money wired. That space was empty now, and it no longer ached. The next morning, I took the trust papers to the notary, officially finalizing the transfer. Then I walked into town, stopped by the library, and picked up a new book. Hardcover, fresh spine, no creases. At the counter, the clerk smiled. "New account, old account," I said, just overdue for a return. Back home, I made a fresh pot of coffee and poured it into my favorite chipped mug. I carried it to the porch, sat in my rocker, and watched the street I'd memorized for over 30 years. Across the way, I saw the Ellenwood's porch light flick on. A child's laughter floated faintly from another yard. A dog barked 2 houses down. The world hadn't stopped, but it had shifted. Inside my house no longer carried the weight of betrayal, just the hum of quiet ownership. I took a slow sip, closed my eyes, and breathed in the morning air. No perfume, no artificial scent, just eucalyptus coffee and cedar mulch. They had tried to rewrite me out of my own story, but I had edited them out instead. And now, finally, the ending belonged to me.